History was made in Cleveland, but not in the way anyone expected. Myles Garrett just shattered the NFL's single-season sack record, an achievement so rare it instantly locks his name into football history. This should have been a solo victory lap. Cameras, headlines, legacy talk, all of it. But that's not what happened. Instead of centering himself, Garrett did something that completely flipped the post-game conversation. He redirected the spotlight to a player who's been questioned all season, a quarterback many fans had already written off, a performance most people misread by staring at a box score instead of the film. Garrett didn't hedge. He didn't soften it. He defended him, publicly, confidently, and without hesitation. That quarterback was Shedeur Sanders. And what Garrett said didn't just praise Sanders, it challenged the entire narrative surrounding him. Because while critics were counting sacks and pointing at numbers, Garrett was watching something else entirely. He saw preparation. He saw resilience. He saw a young quarterback take hits, absorb chaos, and still rise when the game was on the line. This isn't about feel-good teammate quotes. This is about one of the most dominant defensive players of this era telling you who actually won that game and why the surface-level takes got it wrong. If you think you already know how this game played out, think again. Because once you understand what Garrett saw on that field, it completely changes how you view Sanders, the Browns, and what really determines winning football. And the second half of this story, that's where everything shifts. What Myles Garrett did against the Bengals wasn't just impressive, it was absurd. Breaking the single-season sack record is one of those milestones people assume is untouchable in the modern NFL. Offensive schemes are smarter. Quarterbacks get the ball out faster. Protections are designed specifically to neutralize elite edge rushers. And yet, Garrett still found a way to get home 23 times in one season. That number matters, but the context matters even more. Every team the Browns faced knew exactly what Garrett was capable of. They chipped him, doubled him, changed launch points, rolled quarterbacks away from his side, built entire game plans around slowing him down. None of it worked. Garrett didn't just beat blocks, he broke plans. He forced offenses into survival mode before the ball was even snapped. That's what makes this record different from most stat achievements. It wasn't built on surprise or favorable matchups. It was built on consistency under maximum attention. Week after week, Garrett lined up knowing the offense was coming for him, and still won. But here's the part most people missed. This game wasn't just about Garrett hunting a record. It was the final game of the season. Division rival, pride on the line, and the opposing quarterback wasn't some backup. It was Joe Burrow, one of the most poised and dangerous passers in the league. If there was ever a moment where pressure could overwhelm a defender chasing history, this was it. Instead, Garrett delivered. The record-breaking sack wasn't flashy. It wasn't celebrated in the moment. It was almost businesslike. Get to the quarterback, finish the play, move on. That alone tells you a lot about his mindset. Garrett wasn't chasing headlines, he was chasing wins. And that mentality is what makes what happened next so revealing. Because while fans and media were laser-focused on the sack count, Garrett was watching something else unfold. Between defensive series, on the sideline, in the rhythm of the game, he saw how the offense was holding together. He saw the pressure his quarterback was under, and he saw something that box scores don't show. That's why his post-game comments landed so hard. A player chasing history doesn't usually pause to analyze someone else's performance, especially not when that player is a young quarterback under scrutiny. But Garrett did, not because it sounded good, but because, in his mind, it mattered. The record was real, the dominance was undeniable, but to Garrett, it wasn't the defining story of the game. The defining story was how the Browns found a way to win, and who stepped up when the game could have slipped away. And that's where the conversation truly begins. If you only looked at the stat line after this game, you'd walk away with the wrong conclusion. 11 completions, just over 100 passing yards, 6 sacks. To a casual fan, that reads like a quarterback who struggled. To someone who actually understands football, it reads like a performance buried under circumstances most quarterbacks wouldn't survive. This is exactly why Garrett felt the need to speak up. From the opening drives, the Browns' offense was fighting uphill. Passes that hit receivers in the hands ended up on the ground. Timing routes were executed correctly, but the finish wasn't there. These weren't contested catches or impossible throws. They were routine plays that simply weren't completed. And every drop doesn't just cost yards, it kills rhythm, confidence, and momentum. That matters for a young quarterback. When you're doing your job, making the right read, throwing with anticipation, placing the ball where it's supposed to be, and the result is still negative, it creates a disconnect that doesn't show up on paper. Drives stall. Third downs get longer. The playbook shrinks. And suddenly, the quarterback is blamed for an offense that isn't functioning around him. Then came the pressure. The Bengals' pass rush consistently broke through protection. Stunts weren't picked up. One-on-one matchups were lost quickly. In several cases, defenders were in Sanders' face before he could even reach the top of his drop. That's not a processing issue. That's a structural one. 6 sacks sounds like a quarterback problem until you actually watch them. Most of those sacks weren't the result of Sanders holding the ball too long. They were instant losses up front, plays where no quarterback, rookie or veteran, would have had time to operate. And yet, instead of panicking, Sanders kept trying to manage the chaos. That's the part that doesn't get enough credit. Young quarterbacks under constant pressure usually unravel. They rush throws. They abandon mechanics. They force balls into coverage just to escape the hit. Sanders largely didn't do that. He took what the defense gave him. He protected the football. And when the pocket did hold, even briefly, he delivered accurate throws that should have extended drives. This is why film matters more than numbers. Because what Garrett saw wasn't a quarterback failing. He saw a quarterback surviving a broken structure. He saw someone keeping the offense afloat long enough for adjustments to be made. And he saw something else too, composure. That composure is what set the stage for everything that happened after halftime. And once the game flipped, the narrative had no choice but to follow. Whatever was said in the Browns' locker room at halftime worked, because the second half looked like a completely different football game. And more importantly, it looked like a completely different offense. This is where the story of Shedeur Sanders stops being about survival and starts being about response. The first thing that stood out was pace. Cleveland came out with more urgency, cleaner sequencing, and a sharper understanding of how the Bengals were attacking them. The offense wasn't trying to do too much. It was trying to do the right things. Shorter concepts, quicker decisions, clear reads. That adjustment alone took some of the teeth out of Cincinnati's pass rush. And Sanders immediately looked more comfortable. You could see it in his footwork. He wasn't drifting. He wasn't rushing throws unnecessarily. He trusted what he was seeing and got the ball out on time. When the pocket was clean, he stepped into throws confidently. When it collapsed, he didn't freeze. He moved decisively, either buying time or taking what the defense allowed. That's growth in real time. This wasn't Sanders playing scared or trying not to lose. This was Sanders taking control of what he could control. He started converting third downs that had stalled drives earlier. He delivered throws into tight windows when the Bengals tightened coverage. And when the defense dared him to beat them, he did, calmly, methodically, and without panic. The red zone told the biggest story. Early in the game, Cleveland struggled to capitalize on opportunities. In the second half, that changed. Sanders made decisive reads, trusted his receivers, and executed with precision when space was limited. Those are the moments that separate quarterbacks who merely exist from quarterbacks who actually influence outcomes. And here's the key detail most people overlook. This wasn't a stat-padding stretch. It wasn't garbage time. These were high-leverage snaps in a close game against a division rival. The margin for error was thin. One mistake could have swung momentum back to Cincinnati. Sanders didn't make that mistake. Instead, he steadied the offense. While the defense, led by Garrett, continued to apply pressure and force stops, Sanders matched that intensity on the other side of the ball. He didn't need to be flashy. He needed to be effective, and he was. This is why the second half mattered so much. Because it showed Sanders could absorb adversity, adjust, and elevate when the game demanded it. Not every quarterback can do that, especially not young ones. And it's exactly why Garrett didn't hesitate to give him credit afterward. By the time the final whistle blew, the Browns hadn't just won a game. They'd revealed something important about their quarterback. And Garrett saw it long before the conversation ever reached the podium. When the game ended, the obvious storyline was sitting right there. A historic sack record, a legacy moment, a defensive performance that will be replayed for years. Myles Garrett could have leaned into all of it, and no one would have questioned him. That's usually how these moments go. But Garrett didn't take that route. Instead, he did something far more revealing. He talked about the quarterback. Specifically, he talked about Shedeur Sanders, and not in vague, polite terms. Garrett didn't say Sanders managed the game or did his part. He said Sanders made the plays that led them to victory. That wording matters. Because elite players don't hand out credit lightly. Garrett understands football at a level very few people ever will. He knows when wins are the result of defense carrying an offense. He knows when quarterbacks are simply along for the ride. And he knows when someone actually steps up. His comments weren't about optics or leadership cliches. They were about execution. Garrett pointed out that Sanders had been waiting for this rematch, that he remembered the first loss, that he came back prepared to correct it. That speaks to competitiveness and memory, two traits that separate passers who survive in the league from those who disappear. What makes Garrett's defense so powerful is who it came from. This wasn't a coach protecting his player. This wasn't a teammate trying to boost morale. This was the best player on the field, arguably the best defender in football, using his credibility to shut down lazy narratives. And he didn't stop at praise. By saying Sanders settled things, Garrett described something subtle but crucial. Settling a game doesn't mean putting up huge numbers. It means calming chaos. It means controlling moments. It means giving the defense confidence that if they do their job, the offense won't waste it. That's winning football. This is why Garrett's comments hit differently than post-game soundbites usually do. They reframed the entire discussion. Instead of asking whether Sanders did enough, the question became whether people were actually watching closely enough to see what he did. Instead of focusing on sacks and yardage, the focus shifted to impact. And once that shift happens, the criticism loses its footing. Garrett didn't defend Sanders out of loyalty. He defended him because he recognized value. He saw the throws that weren't caught. He saw the pressure that came untouched. And he saw the response after halftime. That kind of endorsement doesn't just protect a player in the moment. It changes how teammates view him. It changes how coaches trust him. And it changes how the organization moves forward. Because when your cornerstone defender tells the world, "That guy helped us win," people inside the building listen, whether the outside noise likes it or not. This is where the conversation usually goes off the rails. 6 sacks. That number gets thrown around like a verdict, as if it automatically means the quarterback failed. But anyone who's actually studied football knows sacks are often a symptom, not the disease. And in this game, the disease wasn't decision-making, it was breakdowns up front. When you go back and watch each sack individually, a clear pattern emerges. These weren't plays where the quarterback stood frozen, waiting for something to magically open up. These were protection failures, missed assignments, lost leverage, free runners coming through gaps that should never be open in the first place. On multiple snaps, Sanders didn't even reach the top of his drop before pressure arrived. That's not holding the ball too long. That's an offense losing at the line of scrimmage before the play can develop. No quarterback, rookie or veteran, can consistently win in that situation. And yet, what's impressive is what didn't happen. Sanders didn't spiral. He didn't start forcing throws into coverage just to avoid hits. He didn't abandon fundamentals. Instead, he protected the football, kept his eyes downfield when possible, and lived to fight the next snap. That's not weakness, that's discipline. Young quarterbacks under constant pressure usually develop bad habits fast. They start drifting backward. They bail from clean pockets because they expect pressure that isn't there. They rush throws that don't need to be rushed. Those habits can derail a career. Sanders showed flashes of the opposite. Even after taking hits, he continued to operate within structure when the structure held. This is why Garrett's comments matter so much. From the sideline, Garrett saw the difference between a quarterback being overwhelmed and a quarterback being unsupported. He understood that the sacks didn't tell the story. The response did. The way Sanders came back on the next drive. The way he didn't let early punishment dictate late-game decisions. That's the separation point. Because quarterbacks who can absorb adversity without changing who they are tend to last in this league. Quarterbacks who internalize chaos and turn it into panic usually don't. Sanders leaned toward the former in this game. The 6 sacks narrative sounds damning until you ask the right question. What did the quarterback do after being hit? In this case, the answer is simple. He adjusted, he steadied, he delivered when it counted. And that's why reducing this performance to a single stat does a disservice to what actually happened on the field. Beyond the stats, the sacks, and even the record, this moment revealed something far more important about the Cleveland Browns, who they are trying to become. Because teams don't build winning cultures through talent alone. They build them through trust, accountability, and leaders who recognize the truth, even when it doesn't match the loudest narrative. That's what made Garrett's comments so significant. This wasn't just a veteran patting a young quarterback on the back. It was a cornerstone player signaling to the entire locker room that performance matters more than perception. That preparation matters more than headlines. That doing your job under pressure earns respect, even if the box score does sparkle. Those messages carry weight internally. When a defensive leader publicly vouches for the quarterback, it strengthens bonds that fans never see. It builds belief in meetings, confidence in huddles, and patience in moments where frustration could easily take over. It tells the offense, "We've got you." And it tells the quarterback, "You're not alone in this." That matters for a young player's development. Quarterbacks don't grow in isolation. They grow when teammates believe in them, when they know mistakes won't erase trust, when they understand that effort, preparation, and response are valued just as much as results. Sanders walked away from this game with something more valuable than stats: credibility inside his own locker room. And that credibility can shape an offseason. Coaches evaluate differently when they see resilience. Front offices plan differently when they believe a quarterback can withstand adversity. Teammates prepare differently when they trust the person leading them. One game doesn't decide a career, but moments like this can redirect trajectories. This is where context becomes everything. The Browns didn't just end the season with a win. They ended it with clarity. Garrett showed the kind of leadership championship teams are built around. Sanders showed the kind of response that gives an organization something to build on. Together, they demonstrated alignment, a defense and offense pulling in the same direction. That alignment is rare. Too often, struggling teams fracture under pressure. Blame circulates, confidence erodes, roles become unclear. What happened here was the opposite. A historic individual achievement became a team statement. A young quarterback's resilience became a shared victory. And that's why this game will matter long after the record books are updated. Because while fans argue about numbers and narratives, teams are built on moments of trust like this. Moments where leaders speak up, moments where effort is recognized, moments where the future feels possible. Myles Garrett didn't just make history that night. He helped define what kind of team the Browns believe they can be, and who they're willing to stand behind as they try to get there. This is the part of the story that won't show up in highlight packages or stat graphics, but it may end up being the most important. Because games like this quietly reset how a quarterback is evaluated, inside the building, not on social media. For weeks, the conversation around Sanders lived in extremes. Either he was being overhyped, or he was being dismissed too quickly. Very little of it was grounded in context. This game forced context back into the discussion. What Sanders showed wasn't perfection. It was something far more valuable: response. He didn't fold when things went wrong early. He didn't disengage when protection failed. He didn't lose composure when hits piled up and drives stalled. Instead, he stayed present. He stayed accountable. And when the opportunity came to change the game, he took it. That's what evaluators care about. Coaches don't expect young quarterbacks to dominate every snap. What they look for is whether a player can process adversity without letting it define him, whether mistakes lead to panic or adjustment, whether pressure creates chaos or clarity. Sanders gave them answers in this game. And those answers travel into the offseason. Film rooms matter more than box scores. Coaches will see the drops. They'll see the free rushers. They'll see the difference between sacks caused by hesitation and sacks caused by protection failure. Most importantly, they'll see the second half, when the game was still in doubt and Sanders made the right decisions. That changes the baseline. Instead of evaluating him as a question mark, the conversation shifts toward development, toward support, toward what happens when the structure around him improves instead of collapses. That's a critical pivot for any young quarterback. There's also a psychological layer here that can't be ignored. Knowing that your best player publicly trusts you alters how you carry yourself. It impacts how you lead workouts, how you speak in huddles, how you approach preparation. Confidence in the NFL isn't just internal, it's reinforced by belief from others who matter. And belief from a player of Garrett's stature carries more weight than 100 talking heads combined. This game didn't silence all criticism. It didn't answer every question, but it did something far more realistic. It reframed the evaluation window. Sanders is no longer being judged solely on outcomes. He's being judged on process, resilience, and impact under pressure. That's how real quarterbacks are assessed. Going forward, every conversation about Sanders will include this game. The record-setting night, the adversity, the response, and the endorsement that followed. Not because it was flashy, but because it was honest football. And sometimes, that's the moment that quietly separates a placeholder from a piece you actually build around. In a league obsessed with numbers, this game served as a reminder that football is still decided by moments, responses, and trust. Myles Garrett didn't just break a record, he cut through the noise. And when someone of his caliber speaks, it's worth asking why. Garrett had nothing to gain by redirecting attention. His legacy night was already secure. History books were already being written. Yet he chose to spend his most visible moment defending a young quarterback who doesn't control the headlines, the narratives, or the stat graphics. That choice alone tells you how this game was actually understood inside the building. Because players know. They know when a quarterback is drowning versus when he's swimming upstream. They know the difference between bad decisions and bad circumstances. They know when someone is shrinking and when someone is standing tall despite the chaos. Garrett watched Sanders take hits, absorb frustration, and still come back steady enough to finish the job. That's not accidental. That's not luck. That's composure. This is why surface-level criticism misses the mark so often. It strips context from performance and replaces it with convenience. Sacks become a shortcut for blame. Yardage becomes the sole measure of impact. But football doesn't work that way, especially at the quarterback position. Not when the game is tight, not when protection collapses, not when execution breaks down everywhere else. What matters is what happens next. Sanders answered that question in the second half. He adjusted. He delivered. He made the throws that mattered when they mattered. And most importantly, he earned the respect of the people who share the field with him, the only opinions that truly last. This doesn't mean every question is answered. It doesn't mean the Browns have everything figured out. But it does mean something important was established. Sanders showed he can weather adversity without becoming it. Garrett showed what leadership looks like when it's real, not performative. And together, they showed what winning football actually looks like. The loudest voices will move on to the next debate. They always do. But inside that locker room, this game will linger, because trust was reinforced, roles were clarified, and belief, quiet, earned belief, was strengthened. Sometimes the most important moments don't come with fireworks. They come with honesty, a veteran telling the truth, a young player proving he belongs, and a reminder that if you want to understand football, you have to look past the stat line and listen to the people who live it. On this night, the best player on the field told you exactly who helped win the game. The only question left is whether you were paying attention.